Welcome back to today's class. We are in the home stretch. Today we're going to be covering Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 13. We just finished Hebrews chapter 11, which goes over the Hall of Faith. We get all these incredible people in the Old Testament that have followed God, men and women that stuck it out, even though they didn't see the promises happen in their lifetime. And so in the beginning of chapter 12, we're really going to be jumping off from there. As we ended in chapter 11, he kind of stops at the wall of Jericho and then gives an overview of all these prophets, people that have had great success or have had great suffering, but all in all, they stayed faithful to God. And so then we get here, therefore, so after all of this learning and all of these people that we learned from in Hebrews chapter 11, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And so if we have all these amazing men and women of faith that have stayed faithful to the end, and even without seeing the promise and their faith being perfected, because that only happens through Jesus, we'll see that in a second, they are our witnesses to our faith. And this is not just like somebody who's like, oh yeah, I saw that too, if you see an accident or something like that. We got to remember that a witness in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament law, was a very serious thing. One of the 10 commandments was do not bear false witness. This was under the penalty of death. You would go and put your name before it and say that I saw something. And so if you lied about it, you would be killed for it. So this is a very serious thing. All of these people come now and witness and testify to the faith and to God and his goodness. And so with these great witnesses, we have such a great cloud of witnesses before us that whenever we are struggling, whenever we are having a hard time endure, we can remember them. Because of them, let us also, so we have the two let us here, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. I love this understanding of sin as weight or as burden. So let us get rid of all of the burdens. Let's get rid of all the sin. So if we are not running the race, if we are not enduring, if we are having a hard time living in faith, then we have to get rid of the sin. We have to get rid of the burdens, and then let us run with endurance the race or the contest that is before us. And so if getting rid of sin is getting rid of our burdens, getting rid of these weights, that prepares us then to run with endurance this race that will be impossible. Let's say, imagine somebody trying to run a marathon with a 100-pound weight on them. It's going to be impossible. It's already hard enough to just run without any weights. And so let us run with endurance this contest that is set before us, so this race. And how do we do that? Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Now, this word founder, we've seen it before. We talked about it, I believe, in Hebrews chapter 4, better translated as champion. So let us, looking to Jesus, let's look to Jesus, the champion and the perfecter of our faith. Why couldn't the previous saints be perfect, as we saw in the end of Hebrews chapter 11? Because Jesus hadn't come yet. And so now he is our champion, and he's the one that makes us perfect. And now it's going to describe Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Now this word despising, a little misleading. It's better, the NLT actually has a better translation saying disregarding. Another way of thinking of this is thinking nothing of the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So Jesus is the perfect example of the one who went through this contest, went through this race, and did it. And now he's our champion, your champion and my champion, as an example, a model for us to run this race well. And he is the one that perfects our faith. In order for us to do that, how was he able to do it? He had the joy set before him. And that's going to be important as we talk more about enduring and understanding what is the joy that is set before us. And we're going to continue to get into that. And because of this joy, this future promise, this reward that was set before him, he endured the cross, and he didn't think anything of the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So he was exalted after. And again, example, model for all of us. We're going to go through pain. We're going to go through suffering. We're going to get a lot into that. And then we have to look forward, have forward thinking, forward future understanding of even if somebody is against me, even if somebody shames me, even if somebody mocks me, I will think nothing of it, because the future promise, my faith in what God has given me a hope in that is secure, far outweighs what anybody can say or do to me. And so now we're going to get more on Jesus as our example. Consider him who endured, this word endure. And we have to remember this Hebrews 11, when we're talking about faith, is sandwiched by stories of endurance in Hebrews 10 and in Hebrews 12, because endurance is what really defines faith and our understanding of faith. And so we see, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary and faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Then have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? So as we're thinking about Jesus, we have to consider that Jesus endured incredible hostility. You know, if you read the Passion accounts, if you watch the Passion of the Christ, the movie, you just understand he was naked, his followers left him, he was beaten, he was crowned with thorns. I mean, he was absolutely humiliated in front of his followers, strangers, people who hated him, people who loved him. And that is the example so that we don't grow weary or faint-hearted. And why wouldn't we grow weary or faint-hearted? Because none of us, you or I, and the church in this house church and that the book of Hebrews was addressed to, haven't resisted to the point of shedding their blood, right? Jesus resisted and he died because of it. And so we haven't struggled so deeply against sin that yet we have died. And because of that, we can't grow faint-hearted, don't grow weary, because Jesus is our example. And one of the things that uplifts us is that we shouldn't forget that God calls us sons. And this is, he's now going to quote Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the ones he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. So this word discipline, we're going to read it 1,000 more times over the next few verses. But there's a couple of things we need to understand as we unpack this. First is everybody that comes to God and is part of his kingdom gets the title of firstborn son. That's why, if you remember in Hebrews chapter 1, way back when we started, Jesus gets the title of firstborn son. He's not actually born, right? He gets the title of it because back then, whoever got the title of firstborn son received the full inheritance. Now, when Jesus gets the inheritance, he shares it with us. And when he shares it with us, all of us, whether a man or a woman, gets the title of firstborn son. And when we get the title of firstborn son, we are called sons of God. We are all called sons of God. And to be a son means that we are disciplined by him, chastised by him. For the Lord disciplines the ones he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. So to be disciplined by God is actually a really good thing. And when the author of Hebrews is trying to explain endurance, getting through suffering, he now brings in this new concept of discipline, that in order to understand endurance and the perfecting of our faith, we can't understand those things without discipline. So when we're enduring hardship, we have to relate that with getting discipline from God. And when we get discipline from God, we're actually receiving something really, really good, and we're going to see why. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. This is so good. So no discipline, aka no hardship or suffering, equals no sonship. So this is why, let's say in Romans or in James, it says, have joy in your trials or in your hardship, because of all the different things it produces. This is Hebrews' version of that, to have joy in what we have in our suffering, in our hardship, because it is actually revealing the love of God. It is revealing his love towards us. Because if you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. If we aren't disciplined by God, if we don't walk through suffering, it actually reveals that we are not sons. We are not part of his kingdom. We don't have that title of firstborn son. And he relates this to having an earthly father, right? If you had parents and they disciplined you and you're older now, you appreciate that discipline if it was done well, because it kept you from doing bad things. And in this instance, it keeps us from sin, and it guides us towards holiness, and it guides us towards righteousness. And we see that right here. For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he, God, disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. The goal of discipline is that we would share his holiness. So without discipline, we would not be able to walk holy lives. We would not be able to share the holiness of God. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And so we have to remember, I keep talking about the short game versus the long game. We have to remember the long game here. The long game here is that we can't just look to our present reality. We have to look to what God is forming in us, what God is molding in us, and what our future reality will look like in God as we endure through all the trials that life has us and the discipline that God allows for us to produce holiness. And what is it going to do? Yes, discipline is painful. Yes, it's hard to go through. Yes, I don't want to have joy in it. Yes, I don't want to endure and I want to give up. But later it yields peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So we have to think of discipline as training. We have to think of it as going to the gym every day, that yes, it's painful. Yes, it hurts, but it is how God trains us in order to reap the reward of righteousness. Righteousness is right standing with God. That's a great definition for us to remember. So the harvest of righteousness is received through the field of discipline in our life. And so we should thank God for discipline, allow God to bring his discipline because it reveals his love for us. It proves that we are sons of God, firstborn sons and heirs to the promise. And it allows us to participate in his holiness, and it yields the harvest, the great harvest of righteousness. This is all the beautiful things that discipline does. And so what we see is that, yes, the world may mock us and shame us, and they may cause hardship for Christians and alienate us, but God uses that for his good to create us holy like him. It is an incredible thing. So the enemy may have plans, the world may have plans, they may want to shame, mock us, hurt us, cause suffering, but God uses that to discipline us, to show us his love, to create us holy like him, to make us righteous, and to get that harvest of righteousness in our life. It's an incredible thing that what the world may have meant for evil, God uses for good. And we see that so plainly here. And then we get this therefore, and we're going to end here today. Therefore, so considering this, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So we get incredible lift, strengthen, make straight your drooping hands, your weak knees, and your feet, the paths of your feet. Why? So if we understand the discipline of the Lord, if we understand how this creates a harvest of righteousness, how it gears us and trains us and helps us be holy and share in his holiness, then don't be sad. Don't be downtrodden. Don't be depressed in hardship and in suffering in your life if you are, whatever you are going through. Instead, hear this encouragement that you should lift up your drooping hands, strengthen your weak knees, and make straight the paths of your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. If your faith is feeling lame, if your faith is feeling defeated, if your faith is feeling put to the side, if you are picking up all these burdens and weights and sinfulness, put that all aside, straighten up, make straight your feet, strengthen yourself, lift up your head, and guess what? You will be healed. It is disposition before God. And in next class, we're going to see how that really comes out to play, how that fleshes out. But if we lift up ourselves, remember the cloud of witnesses that have gone before us that have, yes, had great success, but also have had great suffering. If they witness to the goodness and the faithfulness of God, then let us remember that. Let us remember with endurance that though the world has meant for evil this suffering, God has used it for good to discipline us so that we can partake in his holiness. And man, that is good news. And so strengthen yourself, make straight your paths, and lift up your drooping hands, because God is looking to heal you right now. And I leave you with that encouragement, and I look forward to continuing to flesh this out tomorrow as we finish Hebrews chapter 12.